All right, let's do our blessing for our text study. Asuk b'divrei Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu asuk b'divrei Torah. Praise to you, Lord our God, rule the universe, who's made us holy with your commandments and command us to busy ourselves with the words of Torah. And with that, our text study this evening is going to be about the topic of Rosh Chodesh, and we have a lot of content, and I was not able to come up with a lot of questions, so we'll do as usual. I'll ask different people to read, but don't expect many questions. All right, starting with a Jewish joke though. What service commemorates the cow that was sacrificed on Rosh Chodesh? The answer is Musaf. All right. Charles, would you read Rosh Chodesh on 1 foot, please?
1 foot, okay, that's not a joke. Okay. Rosh Chodesh literally means head of the month. It's a holiday commemorating the beginning of the Jewish month. It happens every month except for Tishrei, because the beginning of that month is Rosh Hashanah.
Great. All right, thank you. Carol Flank, would you read our very first text? Let's start at the very beginning.
This month shall mark for you the beginning of the month. It shall be the first of the months of the year for you. The context is this is from the biblical book of Exodus, right before the 10th plague. If you had to implement this from scratch, what questions would you have?
Thank you.
Why would you want to start the new year with a plague? Especially one of death.
That's the start of
Well,
liberation.
it's protection for the Jewish people. A public display of, obedience to God, I guess, with that plague.
Yeah.
Well, how would you feel going out on December 31st to have a New Year celebration and having a happy time, knowing the next day your neighbors are going to be dying? That's weird.
I mean, they're not just your neighbors, they're your enslavers.
It's true.
Is this referencing the fact this is this month, but where do we get to the point that this is going to occur every month?
That is the beginning of the months. Now, were we measuring, did we have a 30-day or a 28-day lunar calendar before? How do you start how do you think about months then?
Yeah, you raise a good question. What determines a month? All right, Carol Koenig, would you read this text, please?
What determines a month? And new moon after new moon.
There's the answer.
And Sabbath after Sabbath, all flesh shall come to worship me, saith the Lord. Context, I have to turn this up. This is from the biblical book of Isaiah at the very end. Because this verse mentions Shabbat and Rosh Chodesh, it is part of the Haftarah, prophetic reading, for when Shabbat and Rosh Chodesh coincide twice a year. We see from this text that a month is the amount of time it takes to go from new moon to new moon. Moons. A year is therefore 12 moons.
All right, thank you. Questions about this?
Pretty straightforward.
If it says 12 months, but when we have Adar Bet, we have 13 months, don't we?
Right. You raise a good point.
Did the ancients have a leap year?
Define ancients.
Well, approximately the time of the exodus from Egypt.
Well, the Babylonians were measuring things with circa with sun and shadow and dials and measurements before we came about, or when Abraham was there. So that was something that was going on before we became separate and distinguished.
A lunar calendar is shorter. 12 months in the lunar calendar of new moon to new moon is shorter than a full cycle around the sun calendar, solar calendar. So you have to add that extra month, or you'd end up having some of the holidays switch seasons rather dramatically.
But a lunar year is shorter than a solar year. Oh, you anticipate my point so well.
Sorry about that, David.
That's okay. It's a good segue. Keeps us moving. All right. Gabriel, would you read this text, please? Oh, your mic is broken. All right. We'll come back to you another week when hopefully your mic is fixed.
Can you hear me?
Now we can hear you. Go ahead.
Oh, wait, hold on. Let me see if you can hear me.
We can hear you. Can you hear us?
Oh, yeah, now I can. I took out the headphones I was using. I can read it now.
Great.
Starting where? Oh, for context?
Starting with the verse from Exodus.
Oh, sorry. You go free on this day in the month of Aviv. Context. This is from the biblical book of Exodus, right after Pharaoh freed the Israelites from the 10th plague. Aviv means spring, so this verse indicates that Passover has to be in the spring. This is a problem because 12 lunar months is 354 days, while one solar year is 365 days. Therefore, holidays will get 11 days earlier each year. The Muslim calendar is a lunar calendar, and that's why Ramadan sometimes coincides with Yom Kippur and sometimes with Tisha B'Av. Without some way of fixing the Jewish calendar, Passover will eventually be in the winter.
Dun, dun, dun. All right. Well, let's see what we can do about that. All right. Ariel, would you read this text from Sanhedrin, please?
Rabbi Yanai says in the name of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, i.e., this is the language Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel used in his declaration of the intercalation. We are notifying you that the fledglings are tender and that the lambs are thin, darkin, and time for the spring has not yet arrived. And consequently, the matter is good in my eyes, and I have therefore added 30 days onto this year. Context. This is from the Babylonian Talmud, Masechet Tractate, Sanhedrin, which is about the roles of judges. In order to fix the calendar, by the time of the Mishnah, Sanhedrin 1:1, it was decided that every so often a panel of 3 judges could declare the need for an extra month at the end of the year, Adar 1, since the year began with Nisan back then. The word the Talmud uses is intercalator. Today, we would call this declaring it a leap year. This text shows how they came to this conclusion. For another take on the matter, see gobbledygook.
Thank you. All right. And I will let you all watch gobbledygook at your own time, but it involves toads and frogs. Okay. Questions about the leap year?
How I'm trying to figure out in my history chronology is not very good.
Mm-hmm.
So from the time that the law was given until it was declared that they should, or until it was decided they should declare a leap year, how many centuries would that have been? And what happened with the calendar?
Yeah. All right. So you're asking from the Exodus until this time of our text, what happened to the calendar in the meantime? How did it work?
Yeah.
Okay. So the Exodus happened roughly 1240 BCE, based off of the fact that the pottery changes in the land of Israel in the year 1200 BCE, and that's taken by archaeologists to assume that the Israelites moved in. And we know that the Israelites wandered in the desert for 40 years before that, at least based off of what the Bible tells us. So that puts the Exodus at about 1240 BCE. The time of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel is, let's see, Hillel is about the year 1. Rabban Gamliel the first is his son. So if we work in 40s, that puts him about 40. Shimon ben Gamliel is his son. So we're talking about year 80-ish CE. So we're looking at about 1300 years. I'm going to go out on a limb and guess here because I don't actually know, but I'm going to guess that holidays were mostly seasonal for a while, season-based, and eventually they got around to matters like the calendar. I'm going to, basically my sense is that they use a process similar to what's going on, what's being described here in the time of the Mishnah, except that we don't have any textual basis to prove it until then. But once a month, the Bible does say like this holiday should be, like Rosh Hashanah should be in the 7th month, starting from Nisan. That would put it at Tishrei. So I don't know of examples of leap years until we get to the time of the Mishnah and the Talmud, but I assume that they probably had some way of fixing it to make sure that things lined up in the right season.
And in those days, they didn't have a contiguous calendar. They generally use calendars as the number of years of a certain king or a certain person of importance. They didn't really go for 100 years with one single calendar.
Right.
So,
Right. It would be a matter of
years, if you will.
Right. It would be a matter of the months, but not necessarily of the years.
David, I never gave a lot of thought to the whole leap year thing until it affected me personally, because a few years ago, my mom passed away a few days after Purim, so that would have been Adar. And this is the first time that I'll be observing her yurt site during a leap year. So I had to check with Rabbi Russo. So the yurt site will be observed in the second Adar. Things get pushed, just like Purim actually is in the second Adar. But logically, that doesn't make sense because it's like you're pushing things up. You're waiting one more month. And again, I understand about the seasons and all that, but from a personal point of view, it can be a little bit off-putting because you're pushing off this one more month. You know, it's a little bit, like I said, it does have a personal impact, I guess is what I'm saying, at least for me anyway. So
I hear you on that, Don. It's hard. I don't know if this makes it any better, but relative to Passover, it preserves the distance. So if your mom passed away about a month before Passover, it's still about a month before Passover this way.
Oh, I see. So it's more, I see what you're saying. So more like from a relative point of view. Okay. That is more comforting because it's not like just adding 30 more days to the process. It's keeping everything in balance. So thank you for offering that. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
I have a related question that relates to, I asked it in the chat, but related to, I guess, the whole history of the leap year. So modify my question a little bit. Is the leap year an observance that's based in the Torah text itself, or is it like a rabbinic decree? Its existence as a thing.
The calendar is Torah based, and it depends whether you look at the leap year as being at this, at whether you look at it from the angle of it's something that the rabbis created, or you look at it from the angle of there's something the rabbis created in order to fulfill something from the Torah about Passover being in the spring. So I don't know which way officially it falls, but the answer is going to depend on which angle you come at it from.
Oh, I see. Thank you.
Yeah. All right, let's move on. Abba, would you read this text from the Mishnah Torah, please? All right. We'll ask him for another reading later on. Gary, would you read this text, please?
Okay. Starting at 11.
Yes, please.
It comes out that in a cycle that is like this, all of the months are lunar months and the years are solar years. And the 7 leap years in each and every cycle, according to this calculation, are the 3rd year of the cycle, the 6th year, the 8th year, and the 11th year, the 14th year, the 17th year, and the 19th year. Their symbol is 3.6.8, 0.11, 0.14, 0.17, 0.19. Context. This is from Maimonides' Mishnah Torah, where he took the rules in the Talmud and removed the discussion so you could just see the bottom line. In 358 CE, Hillel II fixed the Jewish calendar so that one could plan ahead. Leap years, when an extra month was added, were put at specific points in the 19-year cycle so as to make sure all the math worked out.
Okay, thank you. Questions about when the leap year falls in a 19-year cycle? All right, seeing none. If you have questions that occur to you later, you go ask me. Let's go on to how a new month was determined. Norma, would you read this text, please?
Mishnah Rosh Hashanah. Rabban Gamliel had a diagram of the different forms of the moon drawn on a tablet that hung on the wall of his attic, which he would show to the laymen who came to testify about the new moon, but were unable to describe adequately what they had seen. And he would say to them, "Did you see a form like this or like this?" This is from the Mishnah. How do you pronounce that? Mashchet Tractate Rosh Hashanah, which is about Rosh Hashanah, as you might imagine. Since Rosh Hashanah is at the start of the month of Tishrei, figuring out when Rosh Hashanah was worked the same way as figuring out when any month was. Witnesses would come to Jerusalem to testify that they had seen the new moon. At least 2 of them had to agree on what it looked like. One time, the new moon had to be declared somewhere else for unknown reasons. And the code phrase was, David Melech Yisrael Chai V'Kayam. David, King of Israel, lives and endures. Rosh Hashanah 25:8-9. Henceforth, during Kiddush Levana, a blessing overseeing the moon, said during the first half of the month, we say or sing this phrase.
Thank you. So, to my knowledge, this is the origin of the David Melech Yisrael Chai Chai V'Kayam. That's the first time that I know of where that phrase comes from. This was also the situation that got Rabban Gamliel into trouble with Rabbi Joshua, who disagreed about the interpretation, and then they had all sorts of issues. Same text. questions about how they established when the new moon was before they fixed the calendar.
Yes. It says witnesses would come to Jerusalem to testify that they had seen the new moon. So this sounds like somebody had to come from Hebron, or other cities that they didn't go with the opinion of people in Jerusalem who would have seen the same moon that the people in other parts of the land would have seen. Seems it seems impractical, but it does give people in other parts of the land a role in some important function when everything was centralized in Jerusalem.
That day in Jerusalem. But how long does it take to travel to Jerusalem? Would they come a day after they saw the new moon, or 2 days after they saw the new moon?
Right. This is a question. The systems don't always, like, I don't know if people came from a distance. It could be that everybody knew that when the new moon was declared, that meant that we were automatically like 2 days into the month already. That by the time that people saw the new moon and then came to the Sanhedrin and told it, and they were cross-examined, by then, when the word got out, we were already 2 days into the month and people could count from there. And as for the people coming from Jerusalem itself, I will check further on that. It's just a matter of looking in this Mishnah, Mishnah Rosh Hashanah. But I assume that they would encourage people to come from outside Jerusalem, possibly as well as from people inside Jerusalem, so that if there's clouds in Jerusalem, they can, still get an answer from somewhere else in the country.
You wouldn't have a Rosh Chodesh service if you didn't know about it 2 days late.
So what about celebrating Rosh Hashanah?
That's a good point.
Well, for the Rosh Chodesh, at that time, it would have been a sacrifice, not a service, correct? A special sacrifice for Rosh Chodesh? So would that get postponed, or how would that work? Because in these years, it would have been like the Musaf, a sacrifice, correct?
Yeah. So by the time of Rabban Gamliel II, the temple had been destroyed. However, prior to that, when the temple was still functioning, I'm going to take back what I said, and then I will look it up in the Mishnah after class. It may be that people saw the moon and hurried to Jerusalem and hurried to the temple, to where the Sanhedrin was meeting, in which case then they wouldn't necessarily be coming from outside of Jerusalem. And then they could be cross-examined that night, the messages could go out and everybody would know. But in the meantime, Rosh Hashanah was a 2-day holiday, I believe, to make sure that, if we got it wrong, one of those days was right. Even in the land of Israel, I believe Rosh Hashanah is a 2-day holiday. Although somebody can correct me if I'm wrong.
But does that have to do with the fact that some months Rosh Chodesh is 1 day, some months it's 2 days? Does that factor into this?
No. So what's going on there is that in order to make the math work, some months are 30 days and some months are 29 days. The Siddur Lev Shalem lays it out really nicely. Basically, the way it works is Nisan is a 30-day month, and then every month after that alternates. So Sivan is 29, ER is 30, and so on and so forth. And then you get to Cheshvan and Kislev, both of which can be 29 or 30. I don't know how it's determined. And then Adar is 29, but if you have an Adar Aleph, it's 30 days. And so in a month when there's 30 days, then the last day of that month and the first day of the next month are both Rosh Chodesh. It's a 2-day holiday. Whereas when you have a 29-day month, then only the first day of the following month is a Rosh Chodesh. Good question.
Amazing how scientific they were back then to figure all that out. It's very impressive. I mean, now, now obviously you could do it, because now I'm sure like even last Shabbat, when we bless the new month, I'm sure, various people could calculate all that with programs, but so it's no big deal. But at that time, I am just so impressed how they could do that. That's just my take on it. Thanks for that explanation, but it's amazing.
Yeah, Maimonides, who lived in the 1000s, in his Mishnah Torah, he has the section called Sanctification of the New Month, which has like chapters and chapters of super complicated, at least to me, astronomical observations and mathematical observations, and my eyes glazed over. I'm like, numbers. But to somebody who understands these things, like, you might find it very interesting. And you can find it on Safari, or email me and I'll send you the direct link. All right, let's move on. Alan Paris, would you read our text from Rosh Hashanah, Mishnah Rosh Hashanah?
Mishnah Rosh Hashanah. Initially, after the court sanctified the new month, they would light torches on the mountaintops from one peak to another to signal to the community in Babylonia that the month had been sanctified. Context for Mishnah Rosh Hashanah. Once the court decided that it was a new month, they had to get word out. This was originally done by lighting torches on mountaintops across the land of Israel and all the way to Babylonia, modern day Iraq.
Thank you. So we're not going to look at it now, but when you get this source sheet later this week, there is an excellent depiction from Lord of the Rings, which I believe my father was the one that told me about this, where you can see them lighting the beacons all the way across. It's from The Return of the King, where the warning beacons of Gondor were lit. Questions about lighting things on fire?
It says that when they lit the torches, it's written here that the month had been sanctified. Does that mean that once it got to somebody in Babylonia, they didn't have to celebrate because the month had already been sanctified in Jerusalem?
Yes. I'm trying to think how the Babylonians handled Rosh Chodesh. I think that they probably knew. So assuming that things can move pretty quickly, they weren't doing temple sacrifices in Babylonia, but fires can travel, like seeing a fire and then lighting the next one can move pretty quickly. So if we imagine a timeline where Witnesses see the new moon. They tell the Sanhedrin that night. Sanhedrin sanctifies it. The beacons are lit. News travels to Babylonia. We're still talking within a few hours. So there should be time for people to include Rosh Chodesh prayers the next morning. It's a good question, though.
I mean, also, couldn't people in Babylonia also look into the sky? And so they would pretty much know when the new month was going to be happening, but they would know when to expect that they would be getting a signal. It would be my assumption.
That would make sense. Yeah.
David, when Rosh Chodesh occasionally coincides with Shabbat, you can't light fires and you can't travel. So how would this complicate the whole situation?
Yeah. Good question. In that case, you would probably just have to rely on looking at the sky and being like, looks like a new moon, but it's Shabbat. Bet there aren't going to be any signal fires tonight.
Yeah, but I mean, if you're observing the sky, you're going to see how the moon is approximately coming close to that new moon phase. So you should be able to anticipate and start coming closer to Jerusalem and then see it. You can see all those things. If you know what the months are and how many days, you see the cycle, you can more or less set it up and you can anticipate, and you're formalizing it with the process.
And also, aren't there exceptions to or would there be exceptions to light fire on Shabbat for to increase or to, I don't know, for the prayers or something? I'm not sure if that would be, because I know doctors can, do stuff on Shabbat for that sort of thing. So
yeah, we could also, you could easily keep a small fire or a torch lit in anticipation. If you know you're watching the cycles, you could be ready and not have to light anything. You just toss it in the wood, on the kindling or whatever.
Right.
Well,
so tossing on the kindling would probably count as lighting a fire. But that being said, I could imagine a scenario, and again, I'm hypothesizing here, where if they knew, okay, we're probably getting a new moon tonight, where they might light the fires close to Shabbat, but not when Shabbat had actually started.
I was
The
gonna-
higher Shabbat guy.
I was about to say that actually. Because presumably there were Noachites living in the land, so couldn't they have prearranged a large group of Noachites to just light all these fires for them?
Entirely possible.
I would assume, since these other communities were also listening, especially the ones in Babylonia, were listening to the Sanhedrin, that they also maybe they also along the way up to Babylon had their own Noachites in those communities too, who would have, I guess, kept the chain going, so to speak.
Yeah.
But would you have Jews to do that between Israel and Babylonia all the way through on each mountaintop?
There might have been.
Well, you would have like Noachites do it, I guess, but it would be prearranged. So I don't know the exact process. I know it's really complicated to prearrange something like that, but I know I think it can be done at least.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's correct.
It makes me think too that a lot of this must have been a matter of faith, because I would think intelligent humans, after the first few times, and they say it's 30 days, that they can count 30. So it wasn't so much that as maybe having to see that part of the moon, that little spark of the new moon, to make sure the world was going to continue into the next month. Right? Because I mean, if you just think of science and deductive process and all that, after the first few times, somebody's going to get it. So I think there's more to it than just the science. I think there's a faith component here.
Yeah. All right. So keeping an eye on the clock, I want to be respectful of people's time. So now I'm going to explain things as we go by, and then we can stay on for questions afterwards, after 9 o'clock Chicago time. And then you'll get the source sheet and you can peruse this at your leisure. So, the Samaritans were people that moved in, that were brought into the land of Israel after the Assyrians conquered the northern kingdom of Israel in 722 BCE. They didn't like the Jews. They tried to stop them from building the second temple and rebuilding Jerusalem when they returned from Babylonia. So they decided that they could mess with the system and they could light torches at the wrong times, and that would confuse everybody as to when Rosh Chodesh really was. So then the sages decided they would send out messengers instead, and they would tell the Jews of Babylonia when the next month was. However, it takes longer to get to Babylonia by foot, even if you're doing a relay race, than it does to send fire signals. So because it was uncertain if they were getting there exactly at the right time, the Jews of Babylonia and then Jews in the diaspora in general, outside of Israel, added an extra day to Passover, Sukkot, and Shavuot, so that this way they'd be sure they were getting it right somewhere during that span. And Maimonides says, yes, we know that we know when things are because we set the calendar, but we're following the customs of our forefathers, so we'll keep the extra day even though we know exactly which 7 days Passover is this year. The Reform movements decided this was unnecessary, so they went back to the 7 days of Passover and Sukkot, and the 1 day of Shavuot, as they've been doing in the land of Israel all along. So let's look at how they celebrated Rosh Chodesh in the time of the Bible. So we know from a verse in Numbers that they sounded trumpets over their burnt offerings, their sacrifices on Rosh Chodesh and on the other holidays. We also know that there was a special sacrifice that was presented. You can think of this as a holy barbecue or a Chodesh barbecue. We also know that there was a major feast during the time of King Saul that happened on Rosh Chodesh. And we know this from a verse that is in the Machar Chodesh Haftorah, which was my bar mitzvah Haftorah. When Rosh Chodesh falls on a Sunday, we have a special reading for the Shabbat before. Today, how we celebrate Rosh Chodesh. So we have an announcing of the month, Birkat HaChodesh, which we stand for, and this is a commemoration of the way that the Sanhedrin would announce the new month. We do it now on Shabbat before the new month. We also have Ya'alev Yavo, which is a paragraph that we add to the Amirah and Birkat HaMazon on Rosh Chodesh, as well as on Passover and Sukkot. And then here's a musical rendition of Ya'alev Yavo. It's the Miami Boys Choir, being covered by the Israeli a cappella group Keep Alive. We also say Hallel on Rosh Chodesh. And because Hallel is considered customary but not obligatory, we do it with a blessing per the Shulchan Aruch, but it is not a complete Hallel, so we skip 2 sections that we would normally do otherwise most of the rest of the year. And then we have Musaf. So because there's an extra sacrifice, there's an extra service, and that's true on holidays, and that's true on Shabbat, and that's also true on Rosh Chodesh. When Rosh Chodesh falls on a weekday, which it does all but 2 times during the year, we take off our tefillin before Musaf because we don't wear tefillin on holidays, and Rosh Chodesh is a quasi-holiday. All right, we also have a Torah reading on Rosh Chodesh, which is great if you want to have a bar bat mitzvah ceremony on a Sunday, for instance, or a Monday, if it's on a long weekend. You can, well, Monday, I guess you could do it anyway, but on Sunday of Rosh Chodesh, you can read Torah for a bar bat mitzvah. And we have 4 people reading Torah. This is, per the Mishnah. And the Gemara comments on this, and it says that we have 4 people reading, or 4 Torah readings on Rosh Chodesh, because that doesn't, like, you can make services longer because people aren't working that on Rosh Chodesh. For instance, women are customarily not working on Rosh Chodesh. Wait, what? So then we have a text from Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, which is a midrash, midrashic text from the 800s or so, attributed to Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus, who lived in the 100s. In this text, this midrash is looking at the story of the golden calf, and it's picking up on the fact that in this text, Aaron tells the men, bring me the gold earrings that your wives are wearing. And then the next verse, it says, and the men brought the earrings, and the men brought their earrings. And the author of this midrash looks at that and comes to the conclusion that the men brought their own earrings, but that the women weren't willing to give up their earrings. And so then comes to the conclusion that women didn't participate in the golden calf idolatry and received the holiday of Rosh Chodesh as a reward. And then we have some more text about the connection between women and the moon and Rosh Chodesh and cycles and so on. And because of this connection between women and Rosh Chodesh, today we have women's Rosh Chodesh groups where women will get together on Rosh Chodesh, and there's no set formula for what exactly one does. I've given a text if you're interested in exploring this further, a link, but there's usually some sort of ritual aspect that brings people together and makes this a Jewish gathering. All right, and then finally we have a nice little super small font encapsulation of everything, but you can enlarge this when you get the text on your own time. So I'm going to stop the share